with the big news out of Afghanistan, and that is the last of the U.S. troops have exited the country. I believe the last man on the ground was Major General Donahue. And he stepped off just before midnight. So the official, I guess, end of the U.S. occupation comes on August 30th, just hours before midnight. Of course, on the show, we're celebrating our 1 year anniversary on that day. So with the Afghan war checked off our list, we're now setting our sights on the war in Afghanistan, gonna bring that thing down, and then the war in Yemen is the one we're targeting to try to bring down the next year. But no, in seriousness, getting back to what the actual end of the occupation here, this is huge. I mean, it has been 20 years. To think of 20 years ago when this thing started, I was 11 years old, and now being a grown man and looking back and thinking like what it would have been if I was an 11-year-old in Afghanistan and had grown up through all this, where the chances that I would still be alive, how much hell would my life be, and how much is the U.S. is responsible for that, are a lot of important things to reflect on right now. Everybody really, and especially in the mainstream media, just wants to talk about the withdrawal, and it is news. It is important to talk about. There is reflection there for the U.S. government to figure out ways to, because we have other wars to end. There are ways to do this better. However, that is the smallest of the lessons to be learned. And none of it would have happened if we would have, learned the big lesson, especially from Vietnam, just not to do these interventions and these nation building efforts. And so that is the situation right now on the ground in Afghanistan. The Taliban control, I guess, all of the country other than the Panjshir Valley at this point, but they now control the Kabul airport too. After the U.S. left, the Taliban walked right in. There was some celebratory fire going off, but it doesn't seem like really too much else happened. In the aftermath of this, there have been a lot of pictures put out that were sensationalized, pictures of a couple Chinooks at the airport that the U.S. says that they've disabled, and so now it's really expensive scrap metal. There were some pictures of dogs that may or may not have been left by the U.S. at the Kabul airport. The U.S. Right now, I guess the Biden administration is disagreeing with the fact that those were dogs left by the military, but are in the care of a humane society agency in Afghanistan. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, and continue to focus on this. There is this video, or some still pictures people are putting out, of a Black Hawk helicopter and what appears to be like a South American style hanging from that helicopter. This is not true. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but if you watch the video, you can see that this person is in a harness and is like scratching their head and clearly not dead and clearly not hanging. And so that video, or those photos, don't show what actually happened. There's a story that this was actually a pilot that was trained by the U.S. who was operating the helicopter for the Taliban, but I haven't been able to nail that down for sure. But that is a fake story. And so with the U.S. officially leaving, there's a lot of reports coming out that the Taliban has stepped up their atrocities and human rights abuses. I haven't seen any evidence to corroborate this yet. And in fact, in a lot of cases, it's turning out, it seems to me, to be like the helicopter pictures, where it's very misleading and doesn't actually show what people are claiming it shows. And so I would be very skeptical of any of this information. With the U.S. exiting Afghanistan, all of our diplomatic personnel are also out. Those, I guess, operations have been shifted over to Doha and Qatar, where the Taliban do have a diplomatic presence as well. So I'm guessing the U.S. Will continue to communicate with the Taliban through Qatar. And there are a lot of outstanding issues as far as aid going to the Taliban, and if Afghanistan will receive aid under Taliban control. The Afghan government has a lot of assets that the U.S. has frozen, billions of dollars worth of potential IMF loans and stuff like that, funds that could be unfrozen, and I'm sure the Taliban will attempt to work with the U.S. to some extent to get access to those funds. There was like this portrayal that once the U.S. left, the Taliban would immediately go into massacre mode. I think if you're thinking the Taliban are only not committing human rights violations because they're concerned about the international backlash to it, I would guess that they're going to at least be careful until they get their funds released. And so I wouldn't suspect that the U.S. having personnel on the ground or not would have made a whole lot of difference. And that's one of the reasons I'm so suspect about these claims that the Taliban are suddenly going around killing people when it's potentially very valuable for them if they could get some of these funds released to at least maintain a good PR image up until now. Another thing to think about when considering if the Taliban are carrying out atrocities is just how cohesive and how much control the Taliban leadership has over all their, provincial, now governors or whatever they're calling them, their heads of the different districts and villages of Afghanistan. It may be that some of these people are hardline and are not following orders from the central Taliban in Kabul, who I guess Bardar is still the mullah who's de facto in control of Afghanistan at this point. Even if he's saying don't be cruel, there may be some people within the Taliban who act against that just because it's somewhat of a fractured thing, and a lot of this is built on somewhat unstable alliances that the Taliban are able to put together, changes of allegiances from just a couple of weeks ago. One thing to really hit on when we talk about Afghanistan here is that yes, the occupation is over. This is absolutely fantastic. It's a huge step towards ending the forever wars. However, Biden today, August 31st, in his speech, said the U.S. will continue its over-the-horizon capability in Afghanistan. This has nothing to do with the sunset. This has to do with the U.S. carrying out drone strikes or raids in Afghanistan. The most recent one, drone strike, was in Kabul, an example of one of these over-the-horizon capabilities, and it killed 10 innocent civilians, members of one family. There's a report that actually the two adult men who died in this attack were an Afghan translator and a former, I guess, Afghan army military officer, and then again 7 other children, including some young as 2 years old. And so, when we look at who's killing civilians in Afghanistan this past week, well, ISIS-K is one group, and the U.S. is the second group with this drone strike that I'm sure could really be considered a terrorist act. I mean, they dropped a bomb in the middle of a city and killed a bunch of children. Yet, the Biden administration is portraying this over-the-horizon capability as a good thing. Jen Psaki, Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com caught this. Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, said that strike was a success. And so it's kind of disturbing how the Biden administration is portraying this and, saying that this over-the-horizon capability is a good thing when we know how the terrorism is going to be spread through these drone strikes. When you kill 7 children, that radicalizes people. That's a dangerous thing to do. And no matter how many bad guys you think you're taking out with these strikes, you'll often find people to take their place, especially if you continue to mount up the dead bodies of children in all of this. So that's I guess pretty much all the news I have going on the ground in Afghanistan. Again, there's a ton of reporting going out, a ton of sensational stuff, and from what I could tell, the major stories so far are untrue. Now, one of the